Welcome. My topic today is Mission Impossible, Searching for Linguistic Justice in Education in Africa. Just to give you an overview of where I'm going today, I'll start with looking at the main barriers to be overcome, followed by some different viewpoints on linguistic justice in Africa, then how best to frame the problem, followed by some examples of mother tongue-based multilingual education programs in Africa, looking at Ethiopia, Mali, and Nigeria. And then I'll present the key findings from MTB MLE models in Africa and some implications and recommendations. But first, I'd like you to imagine, if you will, that you're in a geology lesson at school and your teacher sounds like this. In one case, the forming cause is in the body, which is separated. For after the body has been actuated by heat, it is by the reaction of the proper matter of the body that the chasm which constitutes the vein is formed. In the other case, again, the cause is extrinsic in relation to the body in which the chasm is formed. Now, if you're like me, then I expect you'll have absolutely no idea what the speaker is talking about here. This was part of a lecture given by James Hutton, a geologist in 1785, presented to the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And although this is a rather imperfect analogy, I want to suggest that this is what it's like for millions of children in Africa who are being educated in what is essentially a foreign language to them. And notice that there's no technical terms, it's just his way of explaining, which is unclear here. Okay, looking at the barriers to be overcome. Well, I think top of the list is the desire for English, French medium instruction, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, for upward social mobility. Then there's the problem of multilingual classrooms, especially in urban areas, followed by inadequate teacher capacity. There just aren't enough teachers trained to teach all these different languages. And even if there were, there's no curricula and no teaching and learning resources. There's also a lack of understanding of best pedagogical practice. There are other problems, but I would suggest that these are the big five. And looking at these barriers, scholars have taken various viewpoints. Some would say that implementing linguistic justice in Africa in education is impossible, and language revitalization is a hopeless cause. Others would say it's immoral, and language policy is a serious, highly contentious political matter with which a foreigner should not become embroiled. On the other side, some people would say it's inevitable, with increasing enrollment rates in higher education eventually leading to the changes educationalists and Africanists have been clamoring for decades. And Pinkstrand gives the example of Tunisia, which has recently begun making the switch to using Arabic instead of French in tertiary education. But whatever the other viewpoints, most scholars would agree that something needs to be done. Sub-Saharan Africa has the world's lowest enrollment rates and the highest dropout rates. And it also has the highest youth populations and the fastest growing populations. And a situation like this one observed by Professor Van Fouwer in 1963 is very common. He was observing a primary 4 classroom. He said the teacher had a colorful picture on the wall showing different animals and vegetation. He wanted the children to describe what was in the picture. Several hands were up. However, when the teacher indicated that he wanted the answers in English, all hands went down. And this was a very painful situation to this former Minister of Education. And he vowed to promote mother tongue education whenever possible. And he later said, deprive the indigenous speaker of the use of his language for education is like removing his soul. Well, what's the best way to frame the problem? Is it to focus on this being a violation of people's linguistic rights, as documented, for example, in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? Well, some people have suggested that this often only exacerbates the problem, since affirming the unenforceable claimed rights of the minority over the majority often results in non-compliance. Or do you frame the problem as essentially making a choice for poor quality education if nothing is done? And You highlight the poor results, the high repetition and dropout rates, the poor acquisition of national languages, and poor integration with society, and also being bad for the child's cognitive development. But this focuses on the problem rather than the solution, which again often adds to feelings of despondency. So I'd like to suggest that a better way to frame the problem is using the perceived benefit model of language shift proposed by Mark Haran, and which essentially says, look how this other strategy works better for you. So the idea is that illustrating the potential benefits to individuals is most likely to introduce change in attitudes, motivations, and language use. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples of MTB-MLE programs in Africa. I picked these three countries not because I particularly love the colors red, yellow, and green, but because they nicely illustrate different degrees to which governments have had success in implementing programs. They also have different colonial histories, Mali being a former French colony and Nigeria being a former British colony, and Ethiopia having never been colonized. Okay, so what does Ethiopia do? Well, in Ethiopia, there's 5 official languages, 92 living languages, most of which are in vigorous use, and about a third of which are institutional. And this is widely considered to be the most progressive national educational policy environment in Africa. So what do? Well, since 1994, they've advocated for mother tongue-based education in grades 1 to 8 of primary school with English in secondary schools. And the different regions in Ethiopia have a degree of autonomy, so they've been able to choose how well they implement this. And generally, the more homogenous regions have implemented more years of mother tongue-based education. There's, in urban areas, there's schools with different languages of learning and teaching, and parents can choose which language their child learns in. There's also a gradual transition to L2, L3. So English is introduced in grade 1 and Amharic in grade 3 or 5. So what's been the impact of this? Well, unsurprisingly, it's resulted in higher students' achievement. So students have had 8 years of mother tongue-based education, have higher achievement scores across the curriculum, especially in maths and science. And there's also been a 31% increase in the number of children completing 6 or more years of schooling. So what's been the reaction to this around the country? Well, again, it's been mixed. In some regions, there's been growing pressure for English, and this has undermined many of the achievements of the first 10 to 15 years of multilingual education. In 2 regions, which switched back to made an earlier switch to English medium education, the result was that student achievement dropped in all subjects, particularly maths, science, and English. So it's clear that favourable government policies are clearly not enough. People's attitudes also need to be addressed. Turning to Mali now, the official language is French. There are 13 national languages, 68 living languages, half of which are in vigorous use, and 11 Malian languages are officially recognized for education, which means that approximately 2/3 of children have the possibility of access to education in the mother tongue. There's also parental choice in Mali. So in principle, parents can choose what language their children learn in. And within the formal and non-formal sectors, there are both state and privately funded schools offering education in French, Arabic, and Malian languages. But there's 2 basic types of school. There's what are known as convergent teaching schools and traditional French teaching schools. In the convergent teaching schools, Malian languages are used as the language of learning and teaching for years 1 to 6, with French introduced in year 3. This began with adult literacy classes in Bambara in 1979, and initially was given little chance of success. But when the exam results came out, that started to convince the skeptics. And so it was extended to over 2,000 public schools by 2005. In the traditional French teaching schools, they use French as the language of learning and teaching, and these are still in the majority compared to the other ones. And all students, whichever school they go to, take the same exam in French at the end of year 6. And even in the traditional French teaching schools, the teachers often resort to using a Malian language to assist students to understand what is being taught sometimes. The results of these two schools have also been clear. So that in the convergent teaching schools, there's on average 16% better achievements in the national year 6 examinations in French. And there's also improvements in other subjects as well. In some regions where there's significant varieties of the language being used in schools, and for example, different dialects, this has led to complications who recognize teaching difficulties using these languages. Okay, over to Nigeria now, where the official language is English. There's over 500 indigenous living languages, so making it easily the most linguistically diverse country in Africa. Most of these languages are in vigorous use, 19 are institutional, and the largest 16 comprise just under 83% of the population. It also has a very young population. Half the total population of 215 million are under 19. Late last year, the government launched a new national language policy, which said every child shall be taught in the dominant language of the immediate community from P1 to P6, and English will be introduced in the curriculum in P2, and English and the mother tongue will be used from the start of junior secondary school. The reaction to this new policy in the media was rather mixed, and many commentators have pointed out the problem of linguistically diverse urban areas and what's going to happen there. And they're sort of clamoring for more details. And so the government have said, well, an implementation and action plan is forthcoming, but they haven't released anything yet. But the reality on the ground at the moment is that the vast majority of schools, at least in the South and Middle Belt, have almost exclusively English medium instruction. Hausa is widely spoken in the North, and in the North there are many schools using Hausa as the medium instruction. There are a few places where other languages are used as the medium instruction, but these are few and far between. And consequently, there's very high failure rates for English in secondary school. And there's still very little awareness of the language provisions in the current national language policy. In one survey, suggested only 26% of teachers were aware of them. Code switching is also the norm in most of Nigerian classrooms, but it's often viewed as a last resort and associated with inadequate language knowledge among students and teachers with limited English. And also, teacher and student opinions are divided on the use of L1 in the classroom. One recent study said that 70% of teachers reported that students prefer to be taught in English rather than in a local language. But there are some success stories, and this is one of them, the Obolo Bilingual Education Center. Obolo is a language with a community with a population of about 250,000. It's in the south of the country in a rural coastal area, and this center offers instruction in P1 to P6. It's a largely community-based project with limited state funding and provision of resources. So what are the results of this program? Well, very clear. In P1, students begin to read in Obolo, and they begin to write stories in P4. They begin to write more extensively in P5 and begin writing in English. And by P6, their English writing proficiency is higher than most other schools in the state. And parents, teachers, and local leaders are very pleased with the outcomes. So putting all these findings together, what are the key findings from MTB MLA models in Africa? Well, firstly, it's clear that favourable government policies are not enough. It's also clear that English-only models are the least effective. Early exit models offering just 3 to 4 years of mother tongue education are of limited use. No early exit model has proved successful anywhere in the world, in fact. Also, to be successful, to transition to L2 medium education, a minimum of 6 to 8 years is required. The transition to L2 instruction should be gradual, not sudden. And this is because by P6, students have at best about 700 words in English, yet they are expected to manage to learn with a curriculum of at least 7,000 words. So basically, the earlier you start teaching L2 as a subject and the later you introduce it as the sole language of learning and teaching, the better the school results are. So you need to start teaching L2 as a subject early. Public attitudes to MTB Emily also need to be addressed. In one USAID study from 2018, it said that teacher and student attitudes to reading in the L1 are 2 of the top 3 indicators of oral reading fluency in the L1. Translanguaging in the classroom is also a useful tool. So translanguaging is the intentional use of 2 or more languages in a classroom for pedagogical purposes. And studies have shown that this leads to high levels of bilingual proficiency and academic achievement. Also, parental choice is important, so particularly in urban areas. So giving them a choice of which language their children learns in. Also, another recent study has shown that L1 literacy is difficult to implement if there's already high levels of L2 literacy or if L1 is shifting to L2. So a possible MTB Emily model which I propose for Nigeria looks like this, where you have mother tongue education dominant throughout primary school and gradually decreasing throughout secondary school as the L2 instruction is increased. So what are some of the implications and recommendations from all this? Well, I would suggest there's 3 main strategies are needed to encourage MTB MLA in different linguistic contexts. In linguistically diverse urban areas, you need different schools offering different LOL languages of learning and teaching, and parental choice about which school their child attends. In linguistically homogeneous areas where there's vigorous L1 use but low levels of L2 literacy, most schools having L1 as the language of learning and teaching would be best. But in areas with high L2 literacy, of which there are not many in Africa, or in places where L1 is shifting to L2, then strong translanguaging activities in the classroom, along with teaching L1 as a subject, might be best. Also, I'd like to suggest there's different strategies are also needed at different levels of administration. So at the national level, I think there needs to be a degree of state or regional autonomy. I think it would help if governments legitimize translanguaging and code switching practices to try and remove the stigma attached to them. They certainly need to improve awareness of national language policies and also clarify policy details for multilingual urban environments. At the state level, they need to raise awareness of the benefits of mother tongue education. It would probably be easier for them to start with targeting 5 to 10 larger language communities at first than trying to tackle all the languages at once, and focus on urban areas with relatively low linguistic diversity, aiming for 6 to 8 years of mother tongue education with a gradual transition to L2. They'll also need to start offering these languages at teacher training institutions to train teachers to teach them. They'll also need to develop curricula to offer these languages as school subjects, and I think it would be good for them to offer some immersion courses in these languages as well. In some cases, when teaching resources have been developed, involving universities and experts is also a very good idea. I think states and regions also need to hold dialogues with local government, education departments, universities, head teachers, and experts in MLE. At the school level, there's lots of things head teachers and teachers can do. I think beginning with having in-service training days to discuss the benefits of MTE, having surveys in the school on the linguistic diversity and proficiency among the students and staff, communicate value for linguistic diversity in classrooms, for example, by wall displays, use of greetings and student assignments, have skilled members of the local communities come in to teach reading in the mother tongue as a subject, encourage parents to read in their mother tongue with their children at home, produce mother tongue resources to get the students to write storybooks and things and keep these in the school to be used by other students, use class group work and discussions in language groups in linguistically mixed urban schools, and encourage the use of translanguaging rather than code switching in multilingual classrooms in speaking, reading, and writing. So just to end on a note of hope, I wanted to read this quote from a recent thesis by Marianne Aaron, looking at the sustainability of the Oberlo Bilingual Education Centre. She writes, an Oberlo teacher described how during her training, she understood the English textbooks much better after the lecturer had explained everything to them in Oberlo. She says that after his explanation in Oberlo, she would reach home and read up about the subject, and remembering what he said in Oberlo, I would understand it fully. Now, even though some people question her, she does the same in her own primary 5 class. She always teaches in English and then goes again over the material in Oberlo because she says, I want them to have understanding. Thank you.